Well, our first speaker, as you can see, is Dr. Mary Beth Happ, who is a professor of critical care research and associate dean for research and innovation in the College of Nursing. She's very experienced in terms of receiving grant funding and also serving on study sections, and she can speak more about the details of her experience in that regard and again share with you insights into that whole grant funding process. So thank you, Mary Beth.
Good. Good morning, everybody. So it's always good to know the room a bit and to learn about where you all are in grant writing processes. So just a show of hands, how many are thinking about working toward K awards? Okay, career development awards. And how many on R level grants? Okay, good. And then how many are just looking for what's out there? Good. And all of you should still be looking for what's out there, right? Doing the multiple funding streams, multiple opportunities. So, Stuart, these slides will be available to everybody, won't they? And I think one of the things that I wanted to do was just make sure you had links and resources available to refer to. So I see that some people might be at different stages, some people not really knowing the whole alphabet soup yet, and others having figured that out and kind of on their way. So we'll do a bit of both levels, and the primary focus will be to talk about the grant funding process at first the NIH, the steps that we all go through, and secondly to look at foundations and other philanthropic programs and what are the differences, what do you have to think about when planning a grant for those, and then just kind of overall tips and really open it to all of you for questions and what you're thinking, what are the barriers and stumbling blocks that you're facing. So this is just an example of some of the primary awards that I've had over my career, and just to give you a sense of, you know, starting with those training grants through the NIH, using small foundation funding for pilot studies, and then various NIH funding opportunities. And the funding opportunities that provided my R01 level studies were RFAs. So they were particular requests for proposals. And I call them window opportunities. And so being able to mobilize quickly for funding opportunities that you may have hints that are coming or you may not can be really advantageous. You're sort of playing the odds about whether the number of others who might be ready to mobilize in a short period of time. And then career development awards can come early in, could have come, you know, right here, but these other opportunities presented themselves. Or there are also mid-career awards, mid-career development awards that are These are the K-24s. Not all institutes offer them, but they're lovely mechanisms that provide 50% funding support, effort support, as well as then support for additional research. Some of the requirements are that you have to have an existing R01, and it's meant to propose additional mentoring and research work off of your R01. So those of you who are planning R01s and R grants, my Associate Dean for Research told me, as soon as you get that, you're writing the K-24. And it was great advice. And institutes typically don't get as many applications for K-24s. So again, another place to play the odds. Then foundation funding actually worked to further extend and enhance some of the R01 data, and these were, two of these were not small foundation grants, and six figures kind of grants. So those foundations do have opportunities that are both small and large. And then I looked at opportunities to work with small business in small business tech development funds. So it's kind of an array. So what's the first step? Certainly in finding the funding. And I like to peruse the weekly funding opportunities that come out on Fridays. And you can sign up for those notices to receive them regularly. We also have databases that can call those opportunities for you around your particular keywords and research areas. The reason that I like to look at the entirety of the weekly funding opportunities is not just because I'm an Associate Dean for Research. I've always done this, and I've done it to understand where the trends are, where particular institutes are putting emphasis right now, today, and likely into the future. And I've also seen opportunities at institutes that might not have been in my keywords or area or particular area, or opportunities for colleagues that could be collaborative. So it's nice kind of idea place. Yeah?
Can you recommend a central place for not just NIH grants, but grants from other grants?
Yeah.
Or do you have
No? So Jeff from the Office of Research is offering a program on the SPIN database, that program that can orient you to the SPIN database. Jeff Agnoli, which is real. I haven't had coffee yet. Which is really a very powerful database that culls over 40,000 types of grant funding opportunities. Have any of you signed up for it? Yeah. Can you speak to you know, what you see there, how often you get notices?
I get it about once a week. I've been working at fine-tuning the keywords so that I'm getting what I want effectively. So it takes some sort of using it and then refining it. But I found it very helpful.
Okay, great. Anybody else? So if you look, it was announced yesterday in the daily online news for the university. It's a February 19th program that Jeff is offering. So if you want to sign up for that and learn more about the SPIN database. The other place that I look, and this comes out, I think, monthly or every couple of weeks, is the limited submissions also list that also comes out of Jeff Agnoli's office. So types of funding opportunities, and for some reason in my brain, it took me years to understand PA, PAR, PAS, RFA, what are the differences. So I thought this might be helpful to some of you. So parent announcements are those broad funding opportunity announcements, allowing applicants to submit an investigator-initiated application. And we know from NIH reports that the bulk of funding is from these open, or is to these open unsolicited parent announcements. And so, for example, here's a list. And they do update these about every 3 years. But this is an example of the list. So the unsolicited R01, and now those are separated out into clinical trial, basic experiments that aren't clinical trials, et cetera. Okay. And these parent announcements use standard due dates. I refer myself and others to this standard due date table frequently. So NIH funds on 3 cycles, and the due dates depend on what series, what type of grant you are applying for. Program announcements are issued by one or more centers, institutes or centers, and they highlight a particular scientific interest area. They use the standard due dates. Some have particular set-aside funds for the program announcement, and it's special receipt, referral, and review considerations. Requests for applications, RFAs, are again issued by one or more institute or center, and these are more specific. They're a well-defined area of scientific interest. Program officers work hard on developing both the RFA announcements and the PA announcements. Here you do have to have a good fit in the scope. Usually it's a single due date and a single opportunity. So these are those window opportunities. It sometimes is just a single center or institute. and there's typically a special panel that's convened to review these. So I won't go into detail about the grant life cycle, but if you're new to the area, this link walks you through all the phases, both on the grantor side and for the grantee. So you've identified an appropriate NIH funding announcement, whether it's a K, career development, early career development announcement, or an opportunity, or an R-level grant. And now you want to look at fit, and one way to do that, and how you fit in this opportunity, or a good way to do that is to look at NIH Reporter. You can search Reporter. Are all of you familiar with Reporter? Not all. Okay, I don't have a link to Reporter to show you, but if we have time, I can pull it up at the end of the session, because it's very handy and can be very powerful. So it's a database search where you can put in the type of funding opportunity and the institute, and you could see what that institute has been funding. Or for things like K-24s that are a little obscure, well, what's a K-24 abstract at NHLBI look like? What have a funded abstract, or what's that look like? What is the scope? You can also see who at Ohio State has had that particular type of grant. Ohio State, you have to put the institution in several different ways. The Ohio State University, OSUMC, a couple of different ways to find all of the opportunities. Okay, so now you've decided I do have a fit here. Going back to the funding opportunity announcement, and I can't stress this enough, is that you need to read it, highlight it, dissect it, look at all the dates, put them in your timeline, PERT chart, however you organize yourself. Note the page limits and budget allowances and eligibility criteria. Then you want to contact the program officer at the appropriate institute, and those names and contact information are listed at the end of the funding opportunity. Certainly meeting with your grants management team, your mentor and supervisor. Some people need departmental approval to begin this process. And note your internal college deadlines. And then my recommendation is to construct a timeline and use a checklist. Do all of your colleges or departments have particular timelines or checklists that people use? Okay, so you don't need to see that sort of thing. And most of you may fall into this new investigator or early stage investigator status. Do any of you have questions about those designations? Why do we care? Well, in recent years, NIH has been concerned about the pipeline and promoting early stage investigators. So having these designations gives you a point or two in favor of your application. And Dr. Wold and those who are going to speak about the application review process can tell you a little more about that later. So I've just listed some of the areas that would be on your checklist or timeline. Some opportunities require a letter of intent, or it's optional. Program officers like to receive letters of intent just so that they know, get a sense of how many applications are coming in, but it doesn't harm or advantage your review if letters of intent are optional. I've put in red some of the areas that need to have particular attention in your proposal, or that an area where people might not attend as they should. So we know that appraisal of rigor has changed, is what we're looking at, rather than coming forward with the language of scientific premise. It is all toward building your scientific argument and premise, but it's just a little different lens on it. I looked back on reviewer comments for myself and others, and certainly attention to recruitment, retention, calling out rigor and reproducibility is important. And also leaving space so you can talk about anticipated problems and limitations, so you know what they're thinking, right? You want them to know that you've thought ahead about where the stumbling blocks could be in this design, in this setting, using this methodology, and you've got it covered. You have a plan B, or you have set up the study in a way to avoid or minimize those issues. Okay. So these are the submission steps. The grant is uploaded, and this process is different in different departments and colleges. Sometimes faculty have access to Cayuse or whatever electronic system you're using to upload the format, the grant pieces, component parts, and sometimes this is done by the grants management office. And then the program officer in our grants office in the university approves and kind of hits the submit button. You've been registered as a PI in RA Commons, the NIH registration for investigators, and you are alerted and check the application there for any problems. It goes to the Center for Scientific Review for assignment to the institute and an application number, an administrative review for any formatting or other problems, then on to peer review, and finally the advisory council. So these are the post-review steps, and these are all the assuming that you're going on to successful funding. We can come back to those if you have questions. You'll hear from the panel about the review of the proposal. But as early stage investigators, you can become a reviewer. And so I've included this link for how to do that. And I think Dr. Wold is a great example of someone who's been a reviewer for a long time and really gleaned a lot from the participation on those grants review panels. So you're going to learn a lot from him today. But on this bullet right here shows you how to become an early stage reviewer or apply to be an early stage reviewer. And so we've heard that that's an invaluable experience. Being a reviewer allows some opportunities as well. So you can submit your grants on a more continuous schedule if you meet certain requirements as a reviewer. So what are any questions right this minute about NIH proposals and the proposal process? Okay, so you've all heard about PCORI as another funding institute. These proposals come together in a much different way. They look very different. They're focused on, their area of focus is on helping patients, providers, and caregivers make better informed healthcare decisions. And so these are patient-engaged comparative effectiveness research studies that focus on either the comparison of two different treatments or dissemination and implementation of the evidence and decision-making evidence, or methods studies to enhance this type of research. They have 3 funding cycles throughout the year, and a letter of intent is always required. And so the due dates, you always have to back up to the letter of intent due date. And these are not just statements of intent. They are, really crucial abstracts or aims pages that will get reviewed for whether you're invited to submit a full proposal. So crafting those are important. We do have folks in our Office of Research applications office that can help with PCORI grant applications or your ideas around that. And we have successfully funded PCORI teams at Ohio State. So those are things you should not do alone. So foundation funding, I mentioned that there are a range of funding levels, although most often foundation funds provide pilot, proof of concept, feasibility, sample size, power estimation, instrumentation for your NIH federally funded kind of grants. And there are a range of foundations from professional specialty societies that can be national or regional, the Society for Critical Care Medicine, the American Thoracic Society, or more regional. For us, the Ohio Nursing Foundation offers small grants. There are also research foundations, like the National Palliative Care Research Center is just about funding palliative care research. And then philanthropic foundations that are either disease or population specific or have a mission around healthcare and health policy, like Robert Wood Johnson, Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and the Hartford Foundation. And certainly there are local foundations that fund research as well. So how do you identify foundation funding? Certainly through the SPIN and limited submission list to your college, but also our foundation relations office is really very helpful. And if you explore their website, you can find out who is designated for your college or area. And we've been working really nicely, I think, with our foundation relations officer. They work in concert with your college development office. I wanted to just give you an example, show you an example of, one of these research centers. So this is the National Palliative Care Research Center. And so, yeah.
You've lost your sign.
Oh. It's up that back there for some reason. You can all turn around, I guess. I don't know what to do about that. We're going to get some help.
I'll fix it.
So what I wanted to show you on this is, so this is where I go and see, okay, who's had the funding recently, and what does their abstract look like? As I was putting the finishing touches on this last night, I was emailing my colleagues, so do you know so-and-so got one of these? And it is helpful in some ways. You can, for instance, oh, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. I'm so sorry. So when I click on grantees, right, I see, all right, I'll just show you if you're looking at the back. Oh, good. Okay, so you can choose a year, and I've been following this foundation for a while because I can't seem to get anything funded there. And so I have a bone to pick. And have noticed that lots of young investigators are funded here. So, okay, I get that. But don't you know, Randy Curtis got funded in 2018. So I'm thinking, okay, I could still be in the game here for this institute. For foundations, you're going to be working with the Foundation Relations Office and your Development Office, and they may recommend an investigator-initiated pitch to the foundation. As I mentioned, these might also require a letter of intent or a pre-proposal. So like a mini 3-pager is Robert Wood Johnson often for their announcements. They require this. And the writing style may be more of a story. Again, this is a place where looking at previous applications that are successful and how they're styled. And I don't mean like a creative writing story, but a little more narrative and appealing. And the writing's so varying page length, and the funding review and decision is typically quicker in foundations than at NIH. So we're not used to framing our research as a story, and this is one way to do that, to think about it. Now, you're not going to say once upon a time, but it's just a way to get you thinking about that. So here's my story. A man is lying in an ICU bed, terrified and unable to speak. Every day he became anxious, frustrated, and angry when he was unable to make the nurses and other caregivers understand his needs. One day, a nurse and speech therapist developed a communication program for him, and because of that, the nurse understood that he wanted pants rather than pain medicine. And because of that, he was no longer heavily sedated until finally he weaned from mechanical ventilation. Now, this is telling your story at an individual level, which you might do in a talk or in a personal pitch to a foundation. In a written story, you might bring that up a level. 600,000 patients a year lie in ICU beds, terrified and unable to speak due to mechanical ventilation. Every day they experience anxiety, frustration, etc. You get my point. Okay, so some tips for success. Check the funder websites frequently. Read and deconstruct these funding and these are tips for success regardless of whether it's a federal funding source or the foundation funding. Look for updates, expirations, and this is true on some of the program announcements and funding announcements from NIH. I was all set to construct an application for an AHRQ opportunity that originally was set to expire in 20-something, not now, and they just pulled it in December, defunded it. So it's important to look frequently. Many of the program announcements, particularly if they're new, institutes offer webinars, foundations offer webinars and online town hall meetings in preparation. PCORI does this regularly. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Hartford Foundation does this when they're launching a funding opportunity. Meet the program officers at conferences regularly. Go to those roundtable sessions at your specialty conferences. Have face-to-faces with them and via phone. Get reviews. Mock reviews, individual senior scientist reviews. Use an editor, engage consultants. One of the best pieces of advice I had as a young investigator was, who's doing this work in the country? Who's the best person who's doing this work? And you know them because you've been in the literature and perhaps following their work for a while. And this was my ADR, and she said, pick up the phone and call them. Write them an email. Oh, no, I can't do that. But it's amazing how generous these scientists are. And generous in being consultants on your study. Anticipate the reviewer questions. One of my most successful colleagues actually formats his grants in sections that are questions. And here's an example that I used. So how will we know that the intervention is received and understood by caregivers? And then I go on to explain, well, here's how we're going to do it. And the explanation actually goes for longer than this. But this is anticipating the reviewer's question about fidelity. My colleague anticipates the reviewer's question about the method. Why this design rather than da-da-da? Well, we considered the alternatives, but here's why this is best. Use white space and visuals effectively. Sentence length and word size is not a measure of intellect. So run-on sentences, really limit the alphabet soup. And I have seen effectively some people inserting small tables of legends of acronyms. But those tables, you know, you got to limit them. Six big repetitive acronyms that, and plan for simultaneous sequential submissions. So if you're doing planning a K award, a career development award, what are those foundations in your area that also offer career development awards? So can you submit the NIH award and turn it around for the American Cancer Society Career Development Award or the Society for Critical Care Medicine Career Development Award? Robert Wood Johnson Faculty Scholars Award. If you get 2 career development awards, maybe depending on the funding rules, you might have to choose one over the other. Great problem to have. Rather than this idea of submitting and waiting. Waiting is a whole year, 9 months in some cases. And then planning the additional, you know what the weakness in that study was, in that grant was. Go on and get that additional data that's going to make your next application stronger. We have 5 minutes for questions. What are the burning issues that you all have?
And we do have people streaming, so please come up to the mic and ask your questions in the mic so they can hear the questions too.
Thank you, Dr. Happ. Would you talk a little bit about resubmission. I think there is a limit of how many times you can resubmit. It probably depends on the foundation, but if you get a response that it's not funded, but maybe you're considering resubmit after you go cry and have your glass of wine and you come back, what's your approach to take?
Yes, actually Jeff Caterino and I are going to talk about that later this morning. You definitely have a glass of wine. And craft the response to reviewers. So we're going to go into a fair amount of detail about that. And to your point about how many times do you have, so that's changed back and forth over the years. You have one resubmission typically, and then you can put it in again as a new submission. So you're not limited in that way. However, you do need to attend to, you can't just keep playing the odds. You do definitely need to attend to the reviewer comments.
You mentioned small business tech development grants. Can you just talk a little bit about how we find those and how those work?
Yeah, so those are entities unto themselves. They are a partnership between a small business and an investigator. They're not terribly lucrative, but can augment your research. If you have so there are two ways that as an investigator you can approach those. If you have an invention, an innovation that has developed into, and you've developed that into a small business, as some investigators do, then you can be the small business that goes in for the grant. Otherwise, if you want to be the investigator, you partner with a small business. So my example is that I work with a small business that develops patient communication electronic tablet apps. I care about that because my area of research is patient communication in the medical setting when patients aren't able to speak. I want a tool that I can use in my intervention research as part of the toolkit. So it makes sense for me that to work with this small business and but to just work on any innovation that isn't related to my my program of research would be really not to my benefit as an academic scholar. But if you're interested in learning more, you can contact me directly. Okay? Great.